All right, today we are diving deep into the mind of one of Christianity's most challenging and maybe most misunderstood thinkers, Soren Kierkegaard. His entire goal, you'll see, wasn't to give us easy answers, but to throw a wrench into any version of Christianity that had gotten a little too comfortable. Think about this for a second. Kierkegaard, writing as one of his characters, said his mission was to make difficulties everywhere, not to make things clearer, not to simplify, but to make things harder. It sounds completely backward, doesn't it? And that really is the central question for us today. Why on earth would a brilliant philosopher who is completely committed to his faith want to deliberately make it harder to grasp? Well, it might seem a little crazy, but trust me, there was a very precise and powerful method to his madness.
To really get what Kierkegaard was trying to do, to understand his cure, we first have to diagnose the disease he was fighting. He looked around at the world of 19th century Denmark, and what he saw was a deep spiritual sickness. He gave it a name: Christendom.
So, what is Christendom? For Kierkegaard, it's what happens when Christianity becomes the default setting of a society. It's a cultural religion. You're born into the state church, you get baptized as a baby, and boom, you're a Christian. He saw this as a giant illusion, a kind of self-deceived paganism that was just borrowing Christian words and symbols.
And this slide just lays out the stark contrast, a contrast that should really make us all pause. On one hand, you have Christendom, where faith is easy, it's sensible, it fits right in with a comfortable life. But then Kierkegaard looked at the New Testament and he saw something totally different, a faith that was demanding, full of paradox, and required absolute sacrifice. It wasn't just about saying you believe a creed, it was about living a life completely transformed by it.
Okay, so if the problem is that faith has become tragically easy, then what's the solution? Well, for Kierkegaard, the only cure was a necessary dose of difficulty. This is why his writing is so strange and challenging. It's not a bug, it's the main feature. It's the medicine he designed for this sickness.
Now, Kierkegaard borrowed his method straight from Socrates. He had zero interest in just lecturing you or giving you facts to memorize. He wanted to be a midwife for the soul. His whole approach of indirect communication was designed to jolt you, the reader, into self-awareness, to help you give birth to truths that you probably already know on some level, but have been conveniently ignoring in your day-to-day life.
So how did he do this? He wrote his books using a whole cast of different names, pseudonyms. And this wasn't about hiding. Everyone in Copenhagen knew who was writing these things. No, each pseudonym represented a complete worldview, a different way of living. By showing us these lives from the inside, he forces us to hold up a mirror to our own lives and ask, wait, is that me? Is that the life I'm actually living? It's a brilliant strategy to push us from being passive readers into making an active, personal choice.
So through these characters, Kierkegaard lays out what he calls the 3 spheres of existence. Now, don't think of these as rigid boxes. It's better to see them as stages of spiritual development, almost like a framework you can use to diagnose where you or I might be on our own journey.
First, you have the aesthetic sphere. Here, life is all about personal enjoyment and feeling. The biggest question you ask is this interesting or is it boring? Then you have the ethical sphere. This life is driven by duty, by the social good, by living a virtuous life according to universal laws. But here's the twist. Kierkegaard argues that both of these ways of life, if you follow them to their end, ultimately lead to despair. For him, they only find their true purpose when they are totally transformed by the third sphere, the religious. And that's the life of absolute personal commitment to God, defined by words like faith, suffering, sin, and repentance.
Now, because Kierkegaard's style is so unconventional, it has led to some pretty major misunderstandings. So we really need to clear up one of the most common and honestly most damaging caricatures of his thinking, this whole idea of the blind leap of faith.
You've heard it a million times, right? A leap of faith. That phrase is almost always attached to Kierkegaard's name, even though, get this, he never actually wrote it. It has led to this widespread idea that he was the father of fideism, this view that faith is totally opposed to reason, and that you have to believe in things that are just plain illogical. And that is a huge misreading of his work.
The key to unlocking this is understanding what Kierkegaard meant by the word absurd. When his characters talk about something like the incarnation being absurd, they don't mean it's a logical contradiction, like 2 + 2 = 5. No, for Kierkegaard, absurd just means incongruous. It's something that soars way beyond the limits of our finite human reason. It's a paradox that our brains can't fully wrap themselves around, And it forces a choice. Are we going to trust our own reason as the ultimate authority, or are we going to trust in God's revelation?
And Kierkegaard himself makes this crystal clear in his journals. He says that for the believer, the paradox is solved. Reason isn't destroyed, it just sort of steps aside for a revelation it could never have figured out on its own. So faith isn't a leap against reason, it's a deep trust in God that goes beyond the limits of our reason.
All right, on to the second major caricature we've got to tackle. This is the idea that Kierkegaard was a relativist, that he believed truth is just whatever you feel really passionate about. This whole misunderstanding comes from one of his most famous and most misinterpreted statements. Truth is subjectivity. And from that little phrase, a lot of people have concluded that Kierkegaard was denying objective truth altogether, that he was paving the way for our modern, well, that's true for you, but it's not true for me kind of world. But again, this completely misses his profound point. Let's be clear, Kierkegaard absolutely believed in objective truth, like the truth of the incarnation. His argument was all about our relationship to that truth. An objective relationship is just knowing the right doctrines. It's knowing about God. That's the lukewarm, dispassionate faith of Christendom. But a subjective relationship, that's when you passionately make that truth your own, when you are in the truth, when your entire life is staked on it. So truth as subjectivity isn't a denial of reality. It's a searing critique of a faith that's just an intellectual hobby. So, what does this 19th century Danish philosopher have to say to us today? As we think about ministry, right here in our own context, in Nigeria, we have to ask, why does Kierkegaard's fierce challenge still matter so much?
You see, his entire project was a radical call for authenticity. His goal was never to make Christianity confusing. It was to strip away all the cultural baggage, all the easy assumptions, all the religious hypocrisy, and force us into a direct encounter with the raw, demanding call to follow Christ.
Kierkegaard gives us a powerful lens to diagnose religious hypocrisy, and not just in other people, but most importantly, in ourselves. He gives us the stark warning against any kind of Christianity that's more about cultural identity than a life-changing encounter with God. And ultimately, his challenge is for every single one of us to move from being a passive member of a crowd to becoming a single individual who stands in a passionate, personal relationship with God.
And so we're left with this question to really wrestle with. It's the same question Kierkegaard was asking all along. When you look at our churches, our culture, your own life, what is the real difference between just being in Christendom and the lifelong, difficult, and passionate journey of truly becoming a Christian?